Okay, happy snow day, ARC 222. So we're going to keep moving along despite the weather because we need to keep moving forward. We've got a lot to cover this semester. So we left off with an introduction of Twinmotion, and we are going to push that intro a little bit further and carry it all the way through some basic output and connection to your files. So I've got a small little thing here worked up in Format with some objects just to represent the pieces that you're 3D printing. We are continuing on with this scene here that I was using over Jordan Valley Park in Twinmotion. And just as a quick review, one of the key things that you're going to be doing is using the paint features to add some context. So let's recover that one more time. I already have this group of trees as painted vegetation 1. I'm going to come back in and go back to my context vegetation paint, and in my content library over here I'm going to add some different grasses because the combination of things looks better than the same thing over and over and over again. And my paintbrush, and then I can just paint right over the top of this. And yeah, there was a sidewalk there. Yeah, I don't care because this is fun. And let's get right down in here and let's paint sort of this site that I'm going to bring those objects in at. Okay, so what I need to do now in Format is I have these 3 objects. So I'm going to come to File, Export locally, and I'm going to save them as a FBX file as pieces. Save, and yes, for right now I'm going to replace them. Inside of Twin, I'm going to go back to my import, top of this list right here, import and open, and I'm going to select pieces.fbx and open. On my geometry import, there's some important things to note. I'm going to recommend that you use collapse by material, and that is the default setting, so you don't really have to use that a lot. But what that means is, why I point that out, items are going to be grouped based on the material. So more importantly, you can think about this as architecture. If I have 10,000 windows with 10,000 panes of glass, that is going to bring in all the glass are going to act as a single object. In other words, I can't select a single window and move it around, but the advantage to that is I don't have to paint 10,000 windows. I've got one material, one object, I put glass on it, and it covers that glass everywhere. So for productivity, this is set up to be the most efficient way to work. And there are options with that, but this is the default, and this is what I want to recommend you starting with. But it's going to create some complexities as you're working with objects from both Format and Revit. And as long as you're aware of those, it's super easy to work with, and it's going to help you organize your files correctly. So let's just go ahead and import this, and we will see what happens. Now, the next thing that's going to happen is often when we're importing, we're going to see these material conflicts. And that's because a lot of objects, both from Revit or Format, are going to have a material called default. What we want to do when we see that is don't accept the default in this case. We want to go ahead and select keep both so we can put different materials on different objects for those defaults. Okay, so always switch that, right, from use scene material to keep both. That way, if I'm bringing in 4 or 5 different imports from 4 or 5 different things and they happen to have the same material on them, which is often going to be the case, I won't get a new object with an old material placed on it. So we'll say OK to that once I select keep both, and it's going to bring that in. And as you're often going to find, it doesn't bring it in where you think it's going to. It's going to bring things in at the origin, which right now is someplace unknown. So like always, I'm going to select my pieces FBX. I'm going to hit F for focus and realize they're all underground, hanging out with the roots from the trees. So let's just move those things up. I'm going to hit F again. And now I can sort of see where and how these things are going to sit on the site, which is looking a little crowded. There we go. Let's kind of slide those objects right in here. Cool. So I have objects. They're big. They're sort of working on my site between all these trees. And I am moving them about. Now, if you'll notice, it's moving all of these around together, right? And it's a little bit tricky to see because I've got all these trees in here. So let's take a second, and I'm going to turn off or hide all of my trees. Much easier to kind of navigate around and see everything. So, given that they move all together, that is because right here, default material, they are all listed and grouped as a single default material. But let's say that I have a group of objects and I need to be able to move them around or paint them independently. Because if I come here and go materials, let's say I wanted all of those to be a really cool Louis icon kind of material, concrete material. That's not Louis concrete. Let's do a Louis concrete. There we go. Raise the scale up. There we go. Now we have a Louis concrete. Oh dear. Boom. Done. Okay. They all have the exact same material because they're all considered one object. And that is because they were all brought in, imported in as a single default material. So it's an important concept to wrap your head around. Twinmotion is going to group everything based off of the materials, and it's doing that for productivity. I can work faster in that case. Just as an aside, I want more grass, because grass is cool. Oh dear. Except I need to hide all these dudes. More grasses. And yeah, I'm painting right over the sidewalks. Don't really care. Okay, there we go. More objects. All right, so I want those three objects to act differently, to be able to move around differently and move around independently, not as a group. I want to be able to put different materials on each one. So let's look at how to do that coming from Format. So I'm going to go back into Format. So all I need to do is apply different materials on each of my three objects. So to do that, first, under the window drop-down list, I need to turn on materials. Okay, easy peasy to do. So right here, that little checkbox is going to turn my materials on, and it's this little paintbrush. So I've got a couple of options. I can create some new materials, or I can select from the library. So let's look at both of those options. So underneath the materials tool window, I'm going to go to material samples. And let's just do brick and block. And I'll just use this first one right here. I can paint a face at a time using this, right? Like that. Or I can double click one of my objects, select that block material, and it will apply that material to all the surfaces. Okay, so this now would be a separate object inside of Twin. So let's look at just creating a new material. So I'm going to go create a material. I'm going to name this block 2. And let's establish a color for it so I can see it really clearly as its own object. So that's going to add that to my materials list that are in my sketch. So I'm going to double click that object, click on block 2, and now I have a different object based on its materiality here. So let's do that one more time. Oh dear. Block 3. Color, purple. Okie dokie. Double click. Okay, so I now have 3 blocks, 3 different materials. So each of those will import now as different objects into Twinmotion. So let's rerun our export. File, export locally, FBX. And I'm not going to create something new, but I'm going to overwrite that pieces file. Save. Yes, replace. Inside of Twinmotion, back up to my import tab, to my pieces file. I'm just going to click this little reload button. Boom. everything's redone. Now, if you notice, it overwrote my previous materials, but it's now giving me block 2 and block 3. Okay, so now when I go to my materials library, concrete, I can start overwriting those whenever I want to now. This becomes the nice Louis Kahn concrete. This one becomes a nice poured-in-place concrete. With board forms too, that's kind of cool. And this becomes a striated concrete. Right, so all of that is now ready to go. And I can now select each one of these independently and move it around. And that was all entirely based off of separating them by materials. Super, super important concept. Now, if you'll notice, each one of these, the axis, the control point, is based on the 0, XYZ centroid or central point coming out of format. So if you look at the relationship of this box and the XYZ center, 0, 0, 0 in format, that is basically right here. Now, Twin gives us a tool to make things work a little bit easier because sometimes those are several hundred feet away. So to change that pivot point, make things a little bit easier to move around, especially when it comes to rotation. So rather than rotating about that point, I can move that to the center, and that is right here. I'm going to select this, so I'm left clicking. See a little drop down arrow right there? I'm left clicking and holding. I'm saying center pivot, and that puts that object right in the middle. So I'm going to do the same thing with this one. Hold down, center pivot, and that just lets me move things around a little bit easier, a little bit nicer. And so let's stack all these things together. I think I really messed that one up. Oh, how did I do that? That's fun. A few undos. Let's get it back to that. There we go. Now, in terms of moving things around, these you'll hear these in computer software called either widgets or gizmos. You have a few options with it. The default one is pretty nice. It has a rotate, so I'm hovering over and left clicking on that. It has sort of a slide, which is that area right there. Or I can select either one of those axes to move it about that axis. Also, if I select that center node, it is going to snap it to surfaces, which is probably what I had where I kind of messed things up. Very nice tool, but it's easy to get things kind of out of whack. Okay, so from there, what I need to do next is look at some of my other options. If I need to rotate about a different axis, this set of tools right here will allow you to change that. So that gives me 3 axes of rotation. Or I can switch to the scale icon, and this will allow me to scale about a single axis or scale the entire object. All very handy, all things you're not going to use a lot because your scales should be set correctly coming from your modeling software, okay? But on occasion, you're going to need to use them, so it's good to know that they're there. All right, so I've got this as a new object. Let's look at how we export specific views of my object. So let's turn our trees back on. And let's erase a few trees because we've got a few too many. So I've got my painted vegetation, and let's rename that. So it's a right click on that file to pull it up. I want to make sure it's easy to find my trees again in this list. And I'm going to select the eraser tool. I'm going to drop my diameter down so I can have some precision. So that's about a 10-foot brush now. It's kind of easy to come in and erase only the trees that I want to erase, just the ones that are a little bit too close. All right. So now we're a little bit more open with what we can see. I'm going to select back on my screen graph to drop that tool set. And now we have sort of this object ready to export in terms of a series of views. And this is really, again, just an introduction. We're just sort of getting into what we want to be able to see as an export, right? So we have gone through importing, creating context, our settings. We want to take a look at those. And we want to take a look specifically at this group right here where we begin creating content to export. So let's come back in. Let's do one more quick thing. I have trees. That gives me a little bit of a sense of scale, but I almost always want to add at least 1 or 2 people in just so I can have an understanding of how big things are, because I bet you didn't know that those walls and that grass is that big. That's kind of crazy. Right? Had no idea, did you? That he is sitting inside of this massive, tall forest of stuff. Right? So let's try and actually reduce the size of that grass just a bit. Size, sort of virtual lawn mowing here. So I'm just going in on each one of these on the settings. That's our issue right there. That's super tall. Tall grass size, and let's pull all of that way down. Still too tall, isn't it? So let's just go ahead and take that tall grass and let's remove it altogether. There we go. That looks nicer. But we do need to increase our density of some of that. Now we're feeling a little bit more like a park and less like a wilderness lodge. Okay, so we have this set up and ready to go. Let's go back into that. Again, what you're going to learn on this stuff is I'm super picky. There we go. More size. Settings. More size. There we go. Yeah, that's looking really cool now. Okay. We are ready to do an export. So let's set up this as an initial render. And just do that. And before I'm going to start rendering, often I'm coming in, I'm looking at a few things like, do I need to change the weather, like a few clouds in the sky? So that slider is going to do that all the way to the point where it's raining. Really don't want rain. I can also take this slider from midsummer. Let's add a little bit of color to the trees. Make things just a little bit softer. That's kind of nice to do. Don't really want to slide it to winter for this one. Let's make the trees just a little bit taller. That's kind of nice also. And that's my base starting point for the scene. Okay, so every single individual image that I create, I can make those adjustments on. But it's nice to kind of have a base starting point. Where do I want things to be at the very beginning? Right, so let's go down. Now that I have sort of my base effects set up, I can move to my media tab. And we're only starting with the basics of creating images. We'll get into panoramas and videos. Probably won't get into presentation. We'll get into presentations as well, not so much into phasing or panorama sets. But we're going to simply start off with images. So this is your virtual camera. So selecting that, I can come in and say create image. And wherever my current view is at, it's going to set up an image for that. So in other words, if I move my camera over, it's kind of come up like this. Let's get really close to the wall. Set that up. If I go create image, it's going to create another view. If I come down right over here in the shade, and if we go nice and low, too low, still too low. There we go. Something like that across the grass. And create image. I can quickly begin populating these different rendered views. Okay. Now, if you'll notice, on the first one, I definitely have the angle here a little bit messed up. It's not bad, but for an architectural rendering, we usually like to do our best to keep our verticals vertical. This sets up a 2-point perspective. This might give me a lot of ground plane, but I can always edit that out via Photoshop. Okay, so especially if I'm at eye level or something close to eye level, I really don't want the camera looking up too much or down too much, because what that does is that slants our vertical lines. So if you take a look at these verticals, when I want a really good eye level image, I am going to make sure that those verticals are close to being vertical. That generates what's close to a 2-point perspective, reads much better for architecture. So to make those adjustments, I can come in and basically do some nudges with the camera. I'm using the right mouse to look around, kind of line things up with eye level, and then I'm simply going to hit the refresh button, and you're going to see it's going to update that image. Now, if I get into a different kind of camera angle where it's clear that I'm looking down or looking across, I don't really need to do a lot with that. I can totally understand that that's a different kind of angle, a different kind of perspective, and sort of all is fair in those kind of views, right? I am completely comfortable with that. My vertical is not running vertical in this kind of view. But same thing, I make those edits and adjustments, refresh, and it's going to update those. Last one, pretty happy with. So I've got these 3 images. First thing I want to do is give them a quick name. So these 3 little dots. In almost every piece of software, those 3 little dots are going to indicate more options. I'm going to click rename. So this is eye level. This one is bird's eye. And this one is from the grass. Cool, so I've got 3 images, 3 different takes. At each one of these, now I can come in and change some basic settings. Okay, so that is right here underneath more. If I click that more button, I have a whole slew of options that I can start going through that are specific for that camera. For instance, this one, let's say that I would like this one to be snowing. Let's change the seasons, very appropriate for today. Let's change our clouds. Let's get a little bit of snow falling. And now I can go back. I can change the lighting just a bit. Let's change our exposure values a little bit brighter. And we will get into these, especially things like Skydome, which give you some really nice rendering qualities. We'll get into those later. Again, we're just getting started with the software. My format, this is going to be my rendering resolution. Stick with the defaults for right now. 2K is great. When we get into making big architectural boards, we'll change those around. I also have, rendering types. I can do sketchy lines. I can start getting into all different kinds of things. I've got depth of field options, path tracing, which is other options. So this is how the image gets rendered, how it gets processed within the computer. Under camera, I've got depth of field, field of view. Again, for right now, we're sticking with the defaults. Let's keep it simple to get these things output. So now you'll notice if I jump to my next view, have a completely different set of values, right? For weather, sun, all those kind of things. This one, I think I want to move the sun around a little bit. Not too happy with those shadows coming forward because that wall looks super flat. So let's go to more and let's go to lighting. It's not going to be underneath lighting. It's going to be underneath location. So I can slide that time of day down and let's get some shadows working across that surface. Maybe change the month just a little bit. Cool. Much happier with that. Right? Because now I've got some nice shade and shadow across that. I have a little bit better depth. Still not seeing that angle right there very well, so maybe if I slide that around just a little bit more even, I can start to get a little bit of additional modeling along that side of that top block. Let's even offset the just a little bit again. Good enough. Okay. All right. So let's go back and back again to our images. This last one, let's change the weather again. So let's go ahead and make it cloudy. Let's get a little rain happening. And let's make it a little bit more of a night scene. What do you say? Let's go back. And under location, do something about like that. Cool, so we've got 3 different views, 3 completely different settings. When I am done with that, you'll notice right here is this quit media mode, right? As soon as I hit quit media mode, it goes back to my default settings. I can still come back to these 3 different pieces. It reactivates media mode again. But what I want to know there is I am now back to editing my default scene. When I am ready to export these, I'm going to the bottom tab. We are only working with images right now, so I'm going to select empty, and I'm going to select eye level, bird's eye, and from the grass. Cool, pretty simple, and then I'm just coming down. There's really nothing to click. You just come right down to here. Again, for right now, we want to go ahead and accept the defaults. There are more options that you can begin to work with your image rendering to get this out of Twinmotion, but the defaults are great for what we're wanting to do at the entry point. All I need to do now is click Start Export. I am going to select the location where I'm saving them to, which for right now is just my desktop. Select folder, and it's only going to take a minute or 2 to export all 3 of these images. Super fast. Gotta like Twin for this. Again, this is back in the day, old school stuff. That wasn't minutes, that was for sure hours. So I should have 3 images, bird's eye, eye level, and from the grass. So there's render 1, and you can see it's definitely bumps up the quality quite a bit from that real-time kind of view. There's my snowy scene and my sunset rainy scene. That is it for the day, you guys. This is going to get you through that portion of the assignment where we begin to custom build and custom render a little bit, just a hint at how these sites are going to come together that you've selected for your objects. Move your 3D printed virtual forms around, show us how they can be reconfigured, and create these sort of different rendered views. Take care, stay safe, y'all.